Our gala has been happening for 10 plus years, and people know it's a good time, and they come. Usually we have about 300 or so in attendance, but I'm always frustrated because I can't get them to shut up long enough to hear about our work. So how do I get my audience's attention during our event?
Oh, such a good question, because it is something that is a pain point for nonprofits when you have this really important message or fundraising ask or the part of your program and you can't get anyone's attention. I'm sure you've seen that, Andy, right?
So my answer would just be get an air horn, right? Or teach everybody Quiet Coyote like a kindergartner.
Well, and there's a part of me that actually starts to get actually aggravated at people, especially if they're bringing up someone that's like a client they're serving or like some testimonial or story, and people are being rude and just talking over. And so, okay, so I won't go on my own personal rant about it, but it is something that I just go, come on, folks, let's just be polite. Can we just be polite, good people? But come on, is it that hard? So I think that there are some tricks, and I've been to enough of these things to see that what works really well are razor sharp messaging. So, first, let's not even talk about razor sharp messaging. Like, don't have people assuming you have an event where people can actually sit down and have dinner or something like that. That actually helps, right? Because if they're sitting there and mixing and mingling and networking, that's never going to work. And when they're sitting down and having dinner, great. And then when you're ready to start your program, oftentimes strategic use of video is a great way to kind of quiet people a bit, because then you play a video that tugs at their heartstring, and then right after it, you've got someone on stage that like takes over. So, and during this, you have shut down your bar. So if you've ever done this event where like you still keep the bar open, you're also asking for disaster, because people, right, like drinking at these things, they like socializing, and then that leads to a whole other thing. Obviously, you've got to be at these any kind of fundraising event or gala, like you've got to make sure that people who are speaking up on stage are prepared, scripted, have a razor sharp message, so they're not rambling on and on. I went to an event last year, and I don't think it was actually the organization's fault, but I think they had someone who decided to go rogue on stage and decided to share their entire life story. And so
I've been there. I've been to that
awful,
one.
right, Andy? And here you have this honoree who gets up on stage and was probably supposed to take 5 minutes max, and I am not exaggerating, was up there 45 minutes. And you could just watch like people leaving, the crowd just like, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm not listening anymore. And so you've got to figure out a way that does not happen. And, that's why I think some people go to, let me record you and video you in advance, and you can just come up on stage and have the photo moment, but we're not going to give you a live mic. But those are the things that you've got to so be careful of, because that was an awful situation. And I think, other things, like I've seen events like having these sort of dedicated, like sort of these attention rituals where you'll see like lights dim, or maybe there's a specific sound, maybe not an air horn, although that could work. That would be kind of fun to try it, right? Or something, if there's some sort of fun tradition unique to your gala. There was, I've seen really cool events where they'll have like, maybe performers come and like, depending on who the group is, like dancing or singing through the audience. So like everyone just stops to look, and then those people go on stage and do their performance, and then you do it after. So again, like it's just all this stuff takes time and attention to just like the flow, and making sure you've got the timing right. You've given people time to get all their gab session out and their network and mingle out before you start your programming. And so hey, enjoy your dinner and talk to your neighbor is a smart idea, because then people can do it. And then, right after, at the end of that, you're starting to move on. And I think one other thing I would say is like using peer influence. So one of the things a group I work with actually started to do was they'd put a board member or a volunteer or staff member at different tables, like one at each table. That was an opportunity and that doesn't always work with galas because I know sometimes people purchase a table, but they tried to do that strategically as a way to actually have that person kind of corral people or be like, hey guys, like, let's listen or whatever, like, or let me also be the ambassador for this organization at this table. So a lot of that depends on how your event's structured, but all of it just needs to be well thought out, and don't get people who stink at speaking up there. And if you're an executive director or you're someone who isn't great at speaking, then get the coaching, invest in the time to at least do it well enough so that you don't just go up there and you're flat, because it's an important moment. And I think sometimes organizations like think, oh, I don't have to do as well on that part because I'm just whatever. I'm the board chair, or I'm the executive director, and we've got entertainers and we've got all these other people who do it. But no, you do, because yours is probably the most important part, because it's going to be the sharing the mission, the programs, the work, the impact, and the ask.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Schurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Schurick. I'm here with my partner in crime, Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer all of your nonprofit questions about anything having to do with running or being near or interacting with the nonprofit. We will take them all. So the way this works is you send the questions to us, and there's a jillion ways you can do that. There's one new way that just popped up that I hadn't seen, and I'm glad that there wasn't a lot of content there because I would have missed them all. But Spotify now has a communication feature. So if you're listening to the podcast via Spotify, there's actually like a Q&A section there. So I set it up to notify us. So if you're on Spotify and you're listening to the question there, you can actually just hit the button right now and type, hey, I found the button, and we'll actually be able to respond to you. So that's yet another way to ask us questions to put on the podcast. One of the things you can do too is check out the show notes page, which is nonprofiteverything.com. It's got all 180 something episodes on there, as well as if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a search bar and you can search for particular topics. So if there's something specific that you're interested in, I mean, Stacey and I might have already talked about it, or you can listen to something and be like, yeah, that's nonsense, or it's too old to be relevant, and just ask us the question again, because both of us have short memories and we'll just probably answer it again. And the second time we'll probably answer it in a completely different way. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited. We have a difficult question, and we've roped in a guest expert, Randy Marsh. Welcome, Randy.
Hi, thank you, Andy.
I'm going to read your bio real quick. Randy's an experienced nonprofit operations executive with over 20 years experience leading teams managing HR, finance, accounting, IT, and facilities in nonprofit, government, and for-profit organization. He currently serves as the Interim Chief Financial and Operations Officer for Achievement Network, ANet, and provides operational excellence consulting for many nonprofit and for-profit clients. Prior to relocating to Las Vegas, Randy held leadership roles with nonprofits in Washington, D.C., leading human resources, finances, and accounting, grants, IT, procurement, and event logistics. That sounds like a regular nonprofit role to me, honestly, where you're doing everything. And you spent over a decade serving on nonprofit boards, including at various times the finance and audit, governance and nominations, strategic planning, and DEI committees. We're really excited to have you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, so we got a question that was really long, and Stacey and I did our best to kind of whittle it down. We felt like this was sort of out of our wheelhouse, and it got the question itself got really specific and detailed, and we wanted to make sure that we could kind of tackle that, and then obviously broaden the question so that it's applicable to everybody that's listening. So here's the original question. We are a small nonprofit that operates fully remote with everybody working from home in states across the U.S. Our mailing address is in Massachusetts, but we're incorporated in D.C. Is it possible for us to use state programs from our home state of Massachusetts, like paid family and medical leave, for an employee that really lives in another state?
Well, the short answer is maybe. Massachusetts has the Paid Family and Leave Act, like about a dozen other states. And there are several criteria for which you could be eligible. Generally speaking, you do have to live in the state and or work in the state. And so depending on whether your business has a physical location there, or if the employee commutes in or lives there. If you live there and work there, the answer is yes. If you work there but don't live there, the answer is still probably yes. If you don't live there and you also don't work there, the answer is probably no. There could be some exceptions, and at that point, an employment lawyer may be able to delve a little bit deeper in with you, or maybe the agency itself in Massachusetts. But generally speaking, eligibility for Massachusetts is determined by where you work and or where the work is directed from. So if you work remotely, but your boss or the corporate headquarters is located in Massachusetts, then there's a pretty clear pathway to being eligible because the work is at least directed from within Massachusetts. But it doesn't sound like that's the case here, where neither the company, the supervision, nor the employee are located in Massachusetts, and the connection is just about the business registration address. Generally speaking, that's not enough to cross the bar. To actually be eligible. You would really need work to be done there or the person to be there.
Yeah, so I think we had this big explosion of remote work in 2020, and I know that there were a lot of questions from especially nonprofits that aren't very specifically local, ones that are working potentially across the country, working on advocacy, things are like that, where nobody works anywhere near anybody else. And the work itself doesn't live in a particular place. There's no home office. And so we had a scenario where there were state laws that had, you have unemployment insurance, you've got to do business registration. There's all these legal things you need to do to set up a company, which puts it somewhere. But then when we have employees all over the place, I guess some of the questions are like, what are you responsible to do? Do you need to pay unemployment insurance in 9 different states? If you have employees in 9 different states, do you need to have business licenses every place you have an employee if you're fully remote like this?
Generally speaking, yeah, because they did mention Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is one of the 13, localities that also has a paid family medical leave. And if they live in D.C., they're paying taxes in D.C., then they're likely eligible in D.C. D.C. has some different rules that require that you work at least 1,000 hours within D.C. before you become eligible. And you have to be paying the taxes there for this as well, but it's likely yes. So anytime that's been a big challenge for a lot of employers when employees were moving around during the pandemic, and you do have to actually register in those states and get yourself, a tax withholding account and be able to, withhold those taxes and provide them on. And it does sort of become an administrative burden a little bit. But it would also unlock some of these benefits in different states. For the record, the states that have a paid family medical leave are California, Colorado, and Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, and Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Washington, and Washington, D.C. So the good news about the caller that you had is that they do have a tie to Washington, D.C. as well. And so there may be eligibility to look for in that jurisdiction.
So in general, because I think the part of the intention of the question was we want to give our employees like the best benefits we can. And if we've got an option between where the company is domiciled and where the employee actually physically works, do you really get to decide? Can you say if they really, it sounds like this one, they just did their business registration in Massachusetts, or did it say DC? I don't even remember. They did their business registration in one place. Is that enough to be able to say in general that those are the laws you should follow? Or do they really need to worry about like where the employee physically is? Is there a general rule we should follow if we're trying to get people the best potential benefits they can get?
Yeah, the rules vary a little bit state to state, but generally speaking, where the employee physically works is always the easiest way to get that benefit. Like I said, Massachusetts has another pathway, which is where the work is directed from. So that's an additional pathway if your boss was there or if a headquarters was there, but you weren't. But it's all about the physical locality, either of the employee or where the employee is reporting to. So, if you're thinking about the list of states, if they're living in a state perhaps that doesn't have a paid family medical leave, are they being directed from a state, or are you headquartered in a state that does? Because you're right, there could be multiple pathways to unlock these benefits for employees. And, increasingly it may actually be a consideration for where you want to domicile your business, to put yourself in a place that has the most benefits for your employees, to sort of unlock these things for you.
But it sounds like it's also kind of, you have to worry about it state by state because each state may have different rules. I know like unemployment is one thing. You'd have to pay unemployment in generally the state where they work or the state where the corporation has the work is directed, like you said. But then there's things like overtime rules and minimum wage and all the other just kind of like general business rules that I don't know that when they were originally designed, a lot of these, they considered that people would be in multiple places at once and you could pick and choose between those kinds of laws. I mean, are you required to, does each state then have its own rule about, well, if you physically live in Minnesota, you have to comply with Minnesota's minimum wage laws?
It gets to be quite tricky. This is where, depending on your size, your payroll provider or maybe even a PEO could be helpful to kind of keep abreast of these things. One thing that I'm currently navigating is Philadelphia has a special tax for work that is performed within Philadelphia. And so we have employees that will fly into Philadelphia for a week at a time to do some work. And so we're having to figure out a way how to track just that particular work to just pay Philadelphia taxes only when they're physically there. And, as you can imagine, most payroll systems aren't set up with that level of specificity. So it can be challenging. And it sounds crazy that you have to navigate all of these different rules across all of these different jurisdictions, but you do, and it's becoming increasingly difficult if you are, a remote business or someplace that works in several different jurisdictions to be able to navigate that effectively.
So, like with everything in nonprofits, it all comes down to timesheets, doesn't it? Like inevitably, it's like, I'm sorry, we're going to have a conversation about timesheets again.
Yes, it's everyone's dreaded, thing that we have to do, but it unlocks a lot of things in funding. It also really becomes a CYA in compliance as well.
Yeah, it's the one thing that makes everybody angry at the CFO 100% of the time.
Sorry, not sorry, I guess.
I know, exactly. I feel the exact same way. I think we probably did need Stacey in on this conversation because she can provide an alternative view, because you and I are on the timesheet train for sure. That's interesting. So another question that I had is when we have some of the, so we're talking about benefits, but then I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about compliance kinds of things. So let's say you have an employee discrimination suit and the employee works in Maryland and the company is housed in New York. And so we have different rules about discrimination in those two states. Does the employee get to decide which state has the better laws when they go after the company for a discrimination suit?
Oh, yeah. This doesn't just apply to employment law, but, lots of different laws. There's a word for it called jurisdiction shopping, trying to find the best place to file your lawsuit. And that could be, an employment lawsuit. It could be a divorce. It could be a lot of different things. You want to file from within a state that has the most favorable terms for your side. And so if you are an employee looking at, filing as a case against an employer, depending on all of the different jurisdictions that are at play, it could be where the employee is located. It could be where the headquarters is located. It could be where they report to work, if those are all three different places. And all of them, or it could be where the actual incident took place. You could have been traveling to another place, which is not where anyone works, but you just happened to be for a week. That's another jurisdiction. So when it comes to these sort of things, there's a lot of different ways that you can get in there. And again, it's always based on location, where you're at, where the company's at, where the incident occurred. All of those are pathways to unlock a jurisdiction. And it's definitely something you want to consider and talk to different lawyers about in those jurisdictions, about where the terms are most favorable for your side. And it's based on where it's filed. So the company then really doesn't have a choice in how or where they defend themselves. It's the person that brings the suit really has the first choice.
I feel like I know the answer is probably it depends, but is this something that you can direct with an employee handbook that say any employment related lawsuits need to be brought in the state where we're registered, our business is registered, or is that something an attorney would just ignore?
It's definitely, it depends. The courts have been, depending on the jurisdiction, have been a lot stricter lately on what exactly you can restrict your employees from doing, whether that is, requiring some sort of arbitration instead of lawsuits, like some of that's been struck down. So I would say, 5 or 10 years ago, the answer would be sure. You could probably do that and get away with it, but it's not so clear that the courts would let that stand at this point, because generally speaking, it's where you're located, where the company is located, or where the incident took place are all legitimate avenues. And so to give those up, the employee would have to do so in writing, but it's unclear that the courts would honor that today. And again, depending on where you're at. If you're in the Third Circuit, probably not. If you're in some of the other circuits, maybe. California, the West Coast tends to be a lot more favorable to employees and would frown upon those sorts of restrictions, whereas some other jurisdictions like Texas, tends to be a little more favorable for the employer. So it probably honestly depends on where in the country you're located.
So sort of sad news, right? on both sides. Like, you can't really move. Like, you're just kind of stuck with the laws and the things where you live, and that's what you get. Interesting. So one of the things during the pandemic, one of the things we saw is people were just kind of moving all over the country. They're like, you know what? I hate the city. I like the woods. I'm out of here. Right. So what should an organization do to make sure that they kind of have control over where their employees are and understanding, so they don't get surprised with anything?
Well, I think communication is key, and making sure employees know to let you know whenever they are moving. And, it would be nice to say to approve their move, but I know, some people may be moving whether you approve it or not, but it can become really expensive and problematic for a company if somebody moves and you don't know. During the pandemic, the way I found out that one of my employees moved to the state of Wisconsin, where we had up until that point never had an employee, was I got a call from our Morgan Stanley broker letting us know that our account had been frozen by the Treasury of Wisconsin. Looked into it. They had they had somehow figured out we had that account and put it on freeze due to non-payment of taxes of about $1,300. And that's when we found out that one of our employees had moved up to Wisconsin, didn't let us know, but had changed the address in the payroll system. And so the state had been alerted because they changed their address, but we had not been alerted because the payroll system, isn't set up to do that. And so then we had to go through all of the setup. We had to actually register as a business there, sign up for a payroll tax withholding account, and do all of the steps so that we could then start to collect the taxes on a normal basis, as well as pay back the $1,300 that we had owed. And then they unfroze our bank account. But yeah, that was a really hard way to find out that somebody had moved. We owed a state $1,000. So most of these states, they take this very seriously. Our bank account was quite a bit larger than $1,300, so we thought it was a disproportionate response. But there's not really much you can do about it. They refused to do anything about it until we brought that account, current. So it can be really devastating, especially if that's your only bank account. Then suddenly that can be really problematic for you. So really make sure you are, communicating to your employees that it's important that they tell you things, and make sure that you have a good payroll advisor, a good PEO, somebody that can actually help you navigate this, because it's not always as simple as getting a nonprofit license. There are many more steps beyond that to actually registering as an employer, getting a payroll tax account, and there are several steps depending on the state.
Well, Randy, thank you. That was fantastic. We really appreciate that you've taken the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Andy.
Hey all, you made it through another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Are you feeling energized? Are you feeling like you learned a thing or two? Are you feeling ready to conquer the nonprofit world? I hope so, and Andy hopes so. We always enjoy being with you. Speaking of which, Andy, how are you feeling right now after us recording?
I know I say this a lot and it sounds silly, but I really enjoy talking to Stacey. I think that's like the highlight of it. It's just like, oh, look, I get to spend 2 hours with Stacey because we tape these in big chunks so that we can sort of cram them into our schedules, which is somehow we've been able to do for 5 years or whatever, 6 years or whatever it is. But it's always like when I'm done, I'm like, oh, I had a nice conversation with Stacey. That was lovely.
Yeah, we're lucky. I hope you all can feel the energy and chemistry that we have. It's been a blast to work with Andy, and I always learn more from him every time and think, God, it'd be kind of cool to work with Andy. Like, man, we need to go like figure out a way to work together, but beyond just podcasts, because he's a super smart guy and a good guy. So I feel the same way. I always feel a bit energized and sort of a little lighter after we talk. So thanks to Andy as my co-host, and thanks to all of you for listening and being our loyal listeners. We couldn't do this without you, right? Like, you are the ones who make this happen. We always want more people to find us. And a couple of ways that can happen is, one, when you whatever podcast, app or device you use for listening to us, there's ratings. You can rate, right? You can rate podcast, and that helps move us up. You can also share this, right? Share this with a friend or colleague. People might find it really valuable, and then you're giving them a gift. So double bonus. But we appreciate you. Keep your questions coming. nonprofiteverything.com. Thanks.